All right, thank you very much, Lori. I'm Joe Eldridge. I am the NTD Operations Center Manager. My team offers under contract support services for FTA, the Federal Transit Administration, to operate the National Transit Database. And I'm maybe a familiar name to some of you. I see some familiar names, folks I've conversed with in other webinars recently. I just want to thank you for joining this webinar. This is a fairly new and unique presentation in terms of the offerings FTA has provided for NTD, the NTD program. Typically, we've done a lot of webinars focused on reporting and data collection for the benefit of the people entering data into the National Transit Database, which may be some of you. But this was an idea by the FTA NTD program managers to provide a resource for those of you who are interested in using the data that actually gets published. So I'm definitely very thrilled to have this opportunity. I'm joined today by my team members, Todd Schreckengoss and Amanda Walton Hawthorne. Todd and Amanda are senior IT technicians. They are responsible for all of the data publications that you see, basically making that happen, getting that data out to the public. And Amanda, thanks. I see your screen. So I'll turn it over to you in a moment. And we're also joined today by Joseph Gallagher. Joe is with the Strategic Planning and Analysis Office within FTA, and also supports the NTD program as a transportation data analyst. So he's our FTA rep on the call today. Really thrilled to have Joe on as well, who will be helping with some of the Q&A at the end. On the note about Q&A, we really encourage you to use that Q&A feature that Lori highlighted a moment ago. We're going to be looking there to answer your questions during the webinar. This is going to be pretty tight in terms of time, and I'm sorry we're starting a little late, but if you get them in there early, we'll make sure we get you an answer to them. Final note that this will be recorded. We'll definitely do our best to work with Lori and share the recording with those of you who for some reason have to drop early, or maybe those who weren't able to attend, who you all have been talking with. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Amanda, and we will get started. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks from all of us that you can attend to learn more about safety and security event data that's collected in the National Transit Database and available to the public online. This webinar, there we go. This webinar is designed for anyone who's interested in learning more about the National Transit Database data publications, which contain safety and security event data reported to the NTD. Hopefully, that's all of y'all who've joined today. Because this is such a broad audience, a lot of our discussion and demonstration will be fairly high level and generic. We encourage you to follow up with questions after the webinar or in the Q&A portion. In today's webinar, we'll provide an overview of each publication from the NTD containing safety data collected by the FTA. We'll provide tips for using the files and pitfalls to watch out for, especially surrounding data limitations. We'll demonstrate how and where to access the files, and lastly, discuss new fields as well as some upcoming enhancements. We will not be commenting on the quality of specific data points submitted by transit agencies, though we do encourage you to email us at ntdhelp@dot.gov if you see anything that you believe warrants further explanation or that you need help interpreting. We won't be providing our own interpretation or analysis of data on the call. We might look at trends and show you how you can pursue further analysis, but we ourselves won't be making any conclusions about why any trends occurred. We will also not be aiming to identify all users of data products. In fact, one of the main goals of this webinar is to help users from all types of organizations with many varieties of business cases. We will not be performing an in-depth review of safety and security data products. Well, we will of the data products. We will not overview the collection and procedures in depth, except insofar as certain principles such as data submission and how certain fields are defined. We won't be looking at actual reporting systems in which the data is collected. However, again, we are available at ntdhelp@dot.gov for any questions that you may have, especially if you're a representative of a transit agency who's looking for help on data entry or reporting requirement resources. And right here are all of our contact information as well. And the contact info for the leaders of the NTD who cannot be here today, but are very invested in the success of the Data Publications Initiative. Tom Coleman was the former NTD program manager, since elevated to the head of the analysis division, and Chelsea Champlin has filled his position as the current NTD program manager. So first we'll present an overview of NTD's safety data publications and some key terminology that appears in each. Safety data publications contain data regarding reportable safety and security events occurring on public transit property or during revenue service. Most agencies that report to the FTA do so by statutory requirement because they are federal grantees. These agencies may even have their own data repositories, but we believe that the NTD is the most robust collection of safety data that we have nationwide. Importantly, the NTD is limited to just US safety data. This data collection is a massive undertaking that involves a lot of players. If you are one of those players on this call, we appreciate it and thank you for your help. The earliest dates you will see in today's call from the time series files are 2002. Data are still being collected on a monthly basis, as we'll cover in depth later. This is a slight overview of the data collection process. Like I said earlier, we won't get into a lot of specifics, especially not on an agency-to-agency basis. But the point is, the quality of data collected may vary drastically due to those underlying measures that vary from agency to agency. So the goal of publications is, of course, to report all the events out to the public. The more specific questions we're trying to answer include how counts of certain events have changed over time, the longitudinal analysis, and also to identify the most severe, or as our terminology goes, major events, and provide details regarding those major events. We also seek to normalize events based on rates of service provided so that the public can further analyze how service provided or consumed may factor into various trends that we see. Those are some of the basic goals. They may seem pretty simplistic, and that's because they are. The main agenda here is making sure the details on events get out to the public and in a way that is interpretable without a lot of head scratching regarding what a field name might actually mean or how data collection changed over time. These are a few of the terminology items that we'll be diving deeper into. Understanding these is critical to reviewing publications because they appear in every file in some way, shape, or form. First, the SNS event. This list is important because it defines our most important unit. An event must either involve a transit vehicle or occur on a transit right-of-way or infrastructure, such as at a transit revenue facility, maintenance facility, or rail yard, or it must occur during a transit-related maintenance activity. Some exclusions might include events that occur off of transit property while people are waiting to board a vehicle, events that happen in administrative buildings but are occupational safety related, or injuries that result purely from the illness of a passenger or patron. Agency name is fairly straightforward. However, sometimes you might not recognize the agency name that you see in a data product. That's because some agencies have a recognizable doing business as name. We do have a complementary file, the agency information file, that contains the official business agency name to the doing business as name. And I believe Joe might include that in the chat for your reference. Modes and types of service are important to understand. These fields appear in every transit file. A mode is a system for carrying transit passengers described by specific right-of-way, technology, and operational features. And you can see here the list of modes: AG for automatic guideway, CB for commuter bus, and so on. Some of the files further break down modal data into type of service. A mode can be carried out either by the transit agency, whose legal name, that official agency name you see, or by a contractor. In the former case, when the agency operates service themselves, the type of service is DO, directly operated. The cases with a contractor can fall into one of three categories: a general kind of broad umbrella category, PT for purchase transportation, or particular subcases, TN for transportation network companies, and TX for taxi cab operators. These type of service distinctions might not be useful to many of you. Most folks are interested primarily in modal data, and we'll discuss later on ways to aggregate by mode the data that we're looking at. Another important distinction: safety versus security. You'll hear us refer to files as containing safety data events, or SNS events, but we should all be aware of the difference. Safety events pertain to issues that affect the safety of the public or the subsection of the public that is using public transit. These include collisions that involve a transit vehicle, fires on a transit vehicle or in a facility, derailments, hazardous materials, acts of God, which is a legal term describing events that had natural cause and are not known to have been directly manufactured by humans, and other safety events, which capture all other events meeting a threshold. Security events, by contrast, can broadly be thought of as crime statistics. Security events fall into two categories: system security and personal security. Personal security are typically attacks on individuals, whereas system security may not affect any one specific individual, but pose a major threat to the security of the transit system, such as a cybersecurity breach. Many events have both safety and security aspects, and this creates a challenge in data collection. The major safety events file, which is one of our files we'll go more in depth on later, will provide all the detail users need to determine what type of event actually occurred. One common case that creates confusion along these lines is suicide. The NTD collects suicides that involve rail collision, for example, such as when a person jumps in front of a train in an attempt to commit suicide, as a rail collision event. However, starting in 2016, the NTD started to collect detail on each person involved in an event. If the person involved is identified as having died by or having attempted suicide in this section of the report, the person will be counted in the injury or fatality suicide columns of all major event data set. The next and very important distinction is between major and non-major events. We'll be talking about this some throughout our call. This will determine the level of detail that the transit agency must provide for each event. Agencies are required to go into more detail for major events, and it explains why there are two data sets. We will talk about the major events in more detail. The non-major event reporting thresholds are defined by the three types of events you see here: single injury safety event, not otherwise classified, fire requiring suppression, or an assault on a transit worker. In this latter case, an assault on a transit worker would not result in reporting as non-major if it did involve an injury, which is generally the major reporting threshold that an NTD reporter would be evaluating. Again, we'll talk about this example very soon. Some non-major examples. In the first scenario, A passenger on a bus refuses to pay the fare and spits on the operator, but the operator denies transport for medical attention. This would be reported as one physical assault on an operator, and it would be a non-major event since there was no injury, an injury qualifying as someone needing to be transported for medical care. In the second scenario, the train cleaner who accidentally made contact with a passenger's foot is threatened with bodily harm. The worker, again, did not seek medical attention. This too would be a non-major event because there was no injury, and it would be reported as a non-physical assault on a transit worker. FTA publishes safety data publications in 2 places: on its own website, that would be the first link, and to the DOT's Open Data Catalog, which is simply data.transportation.gov. The latter is a newer portal that is the result of a DOT-wide initiative to provide open data. FTA has been using the Open Data portal since around 2018 and is aiming to provide better linkage between the two to make known how these are updated. The publications are updated on a monthly basis on the same day in both places. As you'll see in the demonstrations, there are a number of pitfalls that can happen when using these data. The README and Notes tabs are available in the Excel files that are downloaded from the FTA's website, that first link on this slide. Similarly, the Open Data portal, the second link, has dataset description and column metadata descriptions. It is important to read over the definitions and understand the data type for data that you are working with. On that note, it's also important to be cautious of null handling, null values. The screenshot to the left shows cases of 0 values in FTA's NTD Excel time series file. These files present data by mode and type of service, which represents a sum of all events reported or service data reported for that month. A 0 generally means there were no events reported or no service reported. However, it can also mean the agency in question simply no longer reports to the NTD. There is a complement to these files, the monthly ridership time series, which has a list of the reporters and whether they are active or inactive. This may aid users in understanding the population set and what exactly a given 0 may mean. Finally, data users should expect changes to both this year and the prior calendar year data. CEOs of transit agencies have until the end of February of the following calendar year to certify data they've reported. However, the NTD handles cases of delinquent data as well as cases in which data are edited after certification occurs. For example, due to state safety oversight requirements. Please take caution that data is subject to change, again, especially within a current year or the prior year. Typically, data for a prior year will see less frequent changes as time goes on, as FTA discourages users making changes after certification. The data for the current year, however, changes frequently to add in each new month with each release, or to account for a 90-day lag that happens with safety data between when the event occurred and when it might first appear within the data products. For example, the 2023 data set will not include events occurring in the month of December until the release that will occur in April 2024. Next, we'll talk about accessing specific files on the FTA website. The goal of the threshold adjusted time series, that's one of our products, is to create a time series static data set that adjusts for changes that have either added or removed types of events over various points in time, because the reporting requirements change. As I mentioned, for instance, with how suicides are handled, there was a change in 2016. This file does the best that it can to account for those changes and make sure that longitudinal analysis is as accurate as possible. The table here lists some examples, but we'll also cover these in the demonstration. Summary tab at the end of the file presents totals of all applicable fields in the file, grouped by mode, as well as by rail versus non-rail. It also presents a grand total of events through time, as depicted here. The way to read these tables is by referring to the year column. You can see that second from left. The years will be chronologically ascending as you read down the file. Rates are also presented, which normalize the data based on data concerning service supplied and service consumed. For example, vehicle revenue miles. These are reported by the same set of NTD reporters for the same time period. Another data product, the Major Events Time Series, provides a basis for users who are aiming to understand major events. These events are defined by the threshold here. Currently, FTA has defined several of these thresholds for what constitutes a major event. They can either involve a fatality, a crime in which one or more persons are injured, a serious injury, property damage, which includes substantial damage to the transit property, evacuations of a vehicle, mainline and yard derailments, rail grade crossing collisions regardless of injury, runaway train events, rail-to-rail collisions, and rail transit vehicle collisions with an individual regardless of injury. Note that in the context of NTD reporting, injury means the person harmed was transported away for medical attention, as we mentioned earlier. This is the sole criterion by which an injury is met. Here's a flow chart that goes into some more detail regarding events for which the only threshold involved are injuries. Note that this might differ slightly from what you have in your handout. We enlarged this a bit and removed some text that was presented in a prior slide. So we start from the left, read this left to right. We're starting with a reportable injury, which means someone was transported for medical attention. Whether this gets classified as a major or non-major event depends on whether it was a security event. In other words, a crime injuring a person or not. If it was not, so that top arrow there that says yes, safety event. If it was not a security event, this upper arrow leads us to the next bubble, in which the important factor is how many injuries there were. Single injury events occurring on transit property are thought of as common slips, trips, and falls, which are not related to collisions or some other event type. These would be defined as other safety events. All single injury other safety events are reported on the non-major events form only. All right, now we'll go through a demonstration of the NTD major event time series files. And holler, you should hear sound, but let me know if you don't.
All right, so the first file we're going to take a look at here is the threshold adjusted time series file, which you can download from the link that I presented earlier. Now, this
I don't hear anything, do y'all?
Oh, we hear it, but it's pretty low.
This file is the aggregated data set of major and non-major events, but also normalized so that events that were collected at one point in time
Any better? Still pretty
that are no longer
low.
collected are removed from the file.
Still a little low. I can hear it.
Likewise, that events that are now collected.
People are saying speak louder. So I guess it's not loud enough. And also, Bram says to use the captions, or someone said to use the captions if you're having trouble hearing.
Oh, okay. Good suggestions. In the meantime, for the video.
Amanda, I think we're just going to have to play it, and you'll just have to turn the volume up a little bit if you can.
Yeah, let me see if I can get my system volume up. It's about as high as I can go. I'm not sure if I'll be able to go much louder.
All right, so the first file we're going to take a look at here is the threshold adjusted time series file, which you can download from the link that I presented earlier. Now, this is this file is the.
Should I proceed, or do we need to find another solution?
Couple folks are saying they can hear. It's better. Good enough.
All right.
So yeah, please proceed.
Aggregated data set of major and non-major events, but also normalized so that events that were collected at one point in time that are no longer collected are removed from the file. And likewise, that events that are now collected that weren't previously are also removed. So it's a way to consider changes to data collection that are kind of happening behind the scenes. And we'll see those trends in more detail later in the presentation, and, a little more clearly what is the behind the scenes part of it. But just how is this file organized? Well, it has three kind of README tabs at the beginning. The first has a lot of the general considerations. This is going to tell you about the changes to thresholds and how this file attempts to adjust for them. It's going to tell you about modes that are excluded from the file that do report to the NTD. We'll come back to this at the end of the presentation. It's going to tell you about the 5 major categories of event, and why they're presented this way is really by choice, but the main reason is because these have been consistently collected through time and are easy to, they're reasonably straightforward to aggregate into their own columns. It will direct you to the glossary, but there is a data points tab within this document that's going to define the each field you see as a column in each of the tabs. I will get into the tabs in a minute. It will review data limitations. So these are the warnings about how data is collected, which we've talked about briefly, but again, it reiterates that there's a 90-day lag between when the event is reported and when the event occurs and when the data set is published. So January data, if the transit agency has submitted their events that occurred in January, those will all be published in the May release of the NTD data publications. And all of our publications regarding safety data will use that same schedule. There are a few more notes here on data limitations that we strongly encourage that you read through. There's an important note here about transit worker assault. Again, this is in the context of this threshold adjustment. Data comparisons, NTD versus state safety oversight data. For those of you who are not familiar, the state safety oversight program at one time entirely a different data collection process. Now the reports that are used in the state safety oversight program, at least many of them come directly from the NTD, but previously there was a fairly significant undertaking to align those two data sets, and that was more important for the file. It still is important for this file. There is a little bit of a feedback mechanism. State safety oversight agencies have the role of, as it says here, filing an in-depth annual report on the safety performance for each rail transit agency in their jurisdiction. So there may be a little bit of feedback between the NTD and the state safety oversight program that affects this file. You can see an example of this type of thing happening in August 2020. And then it mentions who reports. So this is important as well. In all the files, full reporters, which are transit agencies operating 30 or more vehicles, must report. Must report on a monthly basis. Those operating 30 or fewer only report annually to the NTD and are therefore excluded from this file. This person types tab is a way to really understand the threshold adjustments that are happening. And so if there's a simple way to explain this, we're trying to make sure that the thresholds that exist now for reporting to the NTD are reflected some way, unless they are impossible to apply to past years because, for example, the data just wasn't collected. So an example of that case when the data just hasn't been collected is assaults on transit workers in 2023. So that's a new data collection. We're going to talk about this a couple of different times throughout today. But this file will exclude the non-major events because data on non-major assaults, non-major security events, as we would define it now, which would mean there is no injury. That was never a reporting requirement, or not explicitly for assaults on transit workers, at least before 2023. So those non-major events are excluded. We have no way to try and estimate what they would have been. That's not the case for major events that are assaults on transit workers. We do have the ability, and in fact, you'll see in the tabs that we'll go through, we have a column where we're estimating what the major event counts for assaults on transit workers were, even before it was its own event type in 2023. So the threshold adjustment here that we're applying for is to exclude yard derailments and rail grade crossing collisions. You'll see the major events file, when we look at that in a moment, that does have a pretty major influence in 2015. We're adjusting for it in this file by excluding those events from the file when we started collecting them in 2015. So what these events are specifically are there yard derailments and rail grade crossing collisions that don't meet another reporting threshold. So they did not involve any kind of injury or property damage or fatality, evacuation to the right of way, etc. They were just derailments or rail grade crossing collisions. So if you're interested in that data set, you will have the ability to find out about it from the major events, the time series file, and the data set. Finally, there's a brief mention here about security events. So really what this means is security events that were specific to the non-major form at the time. And these included things like fare evasion, robbery that also did not result in any kind of major event threshold. Just like we did for yard derailments and rail grade crossing collisions, we're excluding those from the file because otherwise it would present a very, very inflated total. In the case of fare evasions, these would be in the tens of thousands for some years. That would not allow us to be apples to apples when we continue to the point where those events were no longer reported to the NTD, which was 2011 and forward. So this will make sense if you look at the individual tabs. So let's look at what one of these tabs looks like, and you'll notice there are a lot of tabs and they are in order starting from 2002. Now we're interested in your feedback on this. This file has been more or less in the same format for a very long time. I think it's over 15 years now. And so 15 years have been added to the file. It may be worth revisiting the order of the tabs just for ease of use. The very last tab is a summary tab. So these are all calendar years of events. organized by agency, mode, type of service. And then the summary tab will be all of these agency modes and types of service across all years. The file populates a record for the reporter and mode and type of service, whether or not any service was provided that year. But the monthly time series, monthly ridership time series, which is a counterpart to this, does provide some information on when each of these agencies began reporting, agency modes and types of service began reporting what was the first year they appeared in the file. So I would encourage you to consult that file if you need that information, because as you'll note, all of this data is aggregated to a mode level. And during that process, it will impute a 0 if it doesn't have any records to aggregate. So let's talk a little bit more about what these fields are and kind of how they're organized. The data here is about the transit agency. These two fields represent, these three, excuse me, where they primarily operate, the urbanized area, or UZA, where they primarily operate. This is the census's urban area code, which is provided to you as a way to account for changes to the urbanized area name that happened over time. This UZA code is an FTA assigned code that is updated every census. So all of these 2,349 records will be repeated in every tab, and they will appear on the same row in every tab. So one could make a much longer and wider or wider time series. That would be a very wide file. This is presented by years for a number of reasons. Many data users are interested in understanding trends at an annual level because, as we discussed, there are implications for state safety oversight reporting. But in general, it also allows us to look at the monthly ridership data, and at the end of the year, as we'll see in the summary tab, we have enough data to work with to compute rate of some safety metric per unit of service supplied or consumed. I'm going to jump ahead and we'll preview the summary tab, and basically that's what we see. We see the totals, and then there is also a grand total. If we scroll past all of the modes, we can reach the grand total. And so these are the unlinked passenger trips, the vehicle revenue miles, vehicle revenue hours, and vehicles operating maximum service. A lot of acronyms going on here, and with mode as well. I would encourage you to read in the data points tab, which defines all of those, including the modes. It will actually spell out what the mode is. This total of events is also easily interpretable. So you can see that the normalization here that we're applying through time, did at least to some degree work. Many of you will notice there is a little bit of a drop off between 2007 and 2008. From what we've been able to assess, this has primarily to do with the types of events that were collected, but needing to preserve the injury counts. We would strongly caution data users to do more research before using any of the data in this file that occurs before 2008. 2008 onward, because of the adjustments we've been able to make to the types of events that appear in the file, is very consistent without losing a lot of information about injuries or fatalities, which you'll see are the next sections. So each tab is laid out the same way as well, with fatalities and injuries shaded here according to what person type, as we call it, is broken out and will add up to some total. So total employee, for example, represents the total employee fatalities. Total other represents the total non-employee or worker fatalities, which are all these categories here. So it is a bit hard to see, especially over the webinar, I'm sure, but the bold gives away where there is a total. Note here regarding totals too, usually it has total in the name of the field. And so if it's something that's adding up to some kind of subtotal, it will not have the word total in it, and usually will appear directly to the left or right. That's the case for collision. All of these fields can aggregate up to collision total. So I have 36 as I drag across here. There's also a grand event total. So that's any column with the word total in it. So collisions, derailments, fires, security, and NOC, I can add up to get to the grand total. You see my sum down here is probably hard to see, but it's 66, and this value here is 66 as well. There are 3 columns in the middle that I skipped, which are the new assaults on transit workers breakout. So we have our event grand total, we have our total fatalities, we have our total injuries, and then we have a lot of detail based on the person type. Now notice what I'm doing here is not a good idea if I'm looking to total some column. I highlight just this one column and I go down to the bottom and I see 165. I cannot conclude that that is all bicyclist fatalities for 2023. And the reason why is because at the very bottom here, I also have totals. So this will be more than a double count. Not only do I have totals for each mode at the bottom, I have a grand total for all agencies for that column, and then split into bus, rail, ferry, or other categories. So 33 is my grand total, and that's repeated in a couple places because it's split different ways for bicyclists. So that's another pitfall to watch out for as you're using the file. And that is going to apply to every column. So my grand total injuries so far reported in 2023, which as we discussed is through April, 6,152. My grand total fatalities, 111. My grand total, let's not do that, events is 6,846. And that is basically how to use the threshold adjusted file. Notice that 6,846 is there as well. So there are different.
All right. In the interest of time, I think we'll cover some of this material in a later slide. So we'll keep on going to that second means of accessing files, the DOT's open data catalog. In the major safety and security events file, we want to present all detail available for each major event from 2014 to present. This provides the most comprehensive data set, is designed for those who are familiar with differences in reporting requirements for different types of events. It also allows for further aggregation. You can create your own time series format and for trend analysis by date, location, weather, etc. The non-major safety events file is similar in that it presents non-major event data at its most granular level. In this case, the NTD only collects counts of events by month and location. And now another demonstration.
All right, so I am now online on the DOT Open Data Catalog website, data.transportation.gov, and I've landed from the link, I've landed on the major safety events data set. Now, a couple of you might be interested in, well, if I lose the bookmark, how am I going to get back here from data.transportation.gov? Google searching it might give you the data set directly, but if it doesn't, there's a search feature here, and there's also this public transit icon. When you drill into that, you'll be able to see the database files that come from the NTD. So I'm going to search here because I know what the file is named already. I remember it's called Major Safety Events, and there aren't so many that it won't pull that up in the search bar. As you can see, I'm presented with that. If I'm not sure what the file is, I can read over the description, and yes, that sounds right. So this is all the data coming from the National Transit Database that underlies what appears in the major event time series, which we just looked at in the earlier demonstration. So this page here is what they call the primer. So it's not actually going to show me all the data on this page. It's just going to give me information about the data set. As you can see, it's updated once per month. August 7th is when we perform our monthly data release, or around the 4th business day of the month. I think this was perhaps.
All right. And then there's the monthly modal time series, the final data set that we'll be demonstrating today.
Hey, Amanda, I guess you couldn't hear it, but we have time. We can go back and continue the.
Oh, great.
Yep, maybe start a minute and a half
Right,
in.
so I am now online on the DOT Open Data month. August 7th is when we perform our monthly data release, or around the 4th business day of the month. I think this was perhaps a little later, but that's around when you should expect the file to be updated. And it's important to note the number of rows. So this is a fair number of rows. It's every major event reported since 2014, as the description called your attention to. And so that will increase. Generally, it will increase every month as new events are reported to the database. There may be a little bit of a net effect for any events that have been removed within the calendar year that maybe were discovered to not be major events. But generally, that 90-day buffer is designed to prevent that sort of thing. So again, you should generally be seeing the same set of events that were in the prior month, plus any events reported since that time. And a lot of those events that are going to come into the file with each new month are occurring in the period that was 3 months ago from when the data set is published. So August, when we released the August data set, all of the April 2023 events were added since the July release. Hopefully that timeline makes sense. That's generally what you will expect in the months moving forward. So May 2023 events that are submitted to the NTD on time will, May 2023 events that are submitted to the NTD on time will be added in September. So you're probably wondering now, well, this has a lot of columns. How do I really parse through all these and easily pick out what I need to see from these columns? And am I going to be presented with an absolutely giant data set? Well, the answer is yes, but you're also going to be presented with tools to make it more manageable for you. One of those tools is, of course, just reading the data description. So the column metadata will have a definition that goes along with it. You should be able to read the description from the column metadata and get a little bit of a better sense. Not only the description will help you out, but the data type here might help as well. And then there's an API field name as well. I don't know if any of you use this API, but it's useful if you do, to kind of tie back what is the underlying field name to the kind of nicer formatted field name that we're presenting here. So this is a good way to become familiar and really search around for the data. And I consider that a prerequisite of actually going into the file, because once we dive in, we're not going to see these definitions in front of us. Now that's a nice enhancement to kind of be able to hover over a field name and see the definition, but that we don't have any control over just based on the interface that's being used here. But this is, I think, a very helpful a file or primer page, because it gives you that ability first and foremost to kind of zone in, narrow in on what you might be looking for. So I'm going to go into the data set expecting to research event types, how many events have occurred based on their type. And then I'm going to be interested in a couple of specific types. And I'm also going to be interested in mode, transit mode, which, as you see here, is a system for carrying passengers defined by specific right-of-way technology and operational features. So this is kind of how the NTD separates different formats of public transit. You can think of the subway in the NTD. The most analogous term for that is heavy rail, which is abbreviated as well. If you look at the mode abbreviation, it's HR. So we talked about mode earlier. We won't go into too much more depth, but you can see why that might be useful. I might be interested in a rail system, and that gives me the ability right off the bat to filter down to what I'm looking for. Maybe I'm even looking for a specific one, and I can filter on the name, the legal name of the agency reporting to the NTD. But again, for the sake of this demonstration, we're going to just focus on kind of this narrow, business question: how many events were there per type from 2014 to present? So the first thing I want to do is I actually want to go down here, and this is kind of my data transformation tool down here at the bottom, and it's divided into 3 parts. So the first part is column manager. So right away, I don't want to include all 107 columns. I know, having thought about my problem before coming into this, my question, I know that I'm interested in event type. I cannot type today. So event type, there it is. What it's limiting me to is no spaces in my search, because it's going to search by the API field name. So there we go. Event type. I'm also, as I said, interested in mode name. I'm also interested in the total number of events. Well, do I have that here? Probably not, because this is capturing data at the event level, and it wouldn't make sense to tally a 1 in every row. That would kind of be a waste of a column. So I'm going to show you how to do that in a moment, but I'm going to go ahead and apply this, and what we're going to see is that I'm left with only 2 fields. I am still left with 80,300-ish rows, and that's because I haven't applied any kind of grouping yet. So this is still at the same level of aggregation. So when I go into this little icon here, it looks like squares inside of another square, group and aggregate, that's when I can start grouping. And it's going to make this a little bit easy on me, because I can can group by things that I can group by data fields that aren't even in my columns. So I can kind of change my mind if I want to on how I present these groupings without going back into the column manager. But for now, again, I want to do event type in my group, and I want to do mode. I'm sorry, I want to do mode name. And so when I apply that, I get the unique set of event type to mode. So for every event type that has been reported for a given mode with event counts numbering 1 or more since 2014, I have a row. And so I'm down to 206 rows. Well, that's a lot more manageable. Now I'm going to aggregate by my numeric column that I'm interested in. So I'm interested in the count of events. Well, how would I figure that out? Well, I need to just count rows. So I would just like to count really any row where I know there is a field or a value in the field for every row. So NTD ID is one of those. You can't be in this data set if you do not have an NTD ID. And then I just want to apply a count of rows. So I don't want to count distinct IDs. I just want to count rows. And I can provide a name here. I'm just going to call this event count. And I'm going to apply that. And there we go. So now I have my count of events for each type and mode. And let's say I change my mind on how I want to order this. I want to see mode and then type. Well, I can go back into the column manager and I can just drag mode above here, apply, and then I've switched it around. So bus mode, you can see, has all of these event types, and perhaps not surprisingly, collision is a pretty frequent type of major safety event. So this is since 2014, it's 42,000. If you remember from our conversation looking at the SNS time series, you go and look into that major only time series at the collision column, and you select from 2014 down through 2023. And you're looking at just the non-rail modes or bus, as I think it's termed in the file. You'll see that there have been almost exactly that number. So I have answered my question at face value, but let's say I'm still not satisfied with 206 rows. I think that's maybe just too overwhelming. I want to narrow in further on a specific type of event. Maybe it's non-rail collision, like we just talked about. Maybe it's assault. I know many of you are interested in assaults on transit workers and how those appear in the data set. So we could filter the event type. And notice I can drag this up while I'm working down here. And I see right away that I'm presented with assault. And I'm also presented with assault not against a transit worker. So I'm noticing I should see another event type here, which is an assault against a transit worker. I see an assault not against a transit worker. And so that kind of binary, either it was or was not an assault on a transit worker, that data collection started in 2023 when the event type of assault on a transit worker was added. So the reason why I'm not seeing it is because I actually have a more granular event type assignment. This is, again, the most precise event type that's collected. So I have these categories here: physical and non-physical assault on transit worker, and then that is broken into an operator or other. So it looks like I don't have any non-physical assaults on operators reported as of yet in this data set. I have all the other pretty different data in the same row. And there's a kind of caveat with null handling here too that we're going to watch out for, where there might be zeros reported because the type of data collected actually does not apply. So it's
I jumped ahead a bit here, but to catch up any who are confused, Joe in the recording will now be demonstrating non-major safety events.
It's important to understand there's a safety and security level here, and what is in the row depends on that. But what we're actually collecting here is the number of events or assaults on transit workers for non-major assaults, non-major events, and then injuries as well. So those are the single injuries not otherwise classified. And each row is this long string here. It's an agency mode, type of service, month, event type, and event location. So I'm guessing very few of you will be interested in seeing the data at that level unless you're really interested in location. You're probably going to want to roll up at least one level to event type. Maybe you want to roll up to a year. You don't care about month. That's going to be possible. The type of aggregation we did can become immediately useful. So I've got the mode. In this case, I only have mode abbreviation, which makes the reference we had in the time series important. I'm also noticing that month here is a numeric value. So 1 is January and a 12 is December, of course, but also just making sure that I'm considering this a categorical field, even though it's not really presented that way. So I'm happy with this data set, and at this point I could export. We didn't talk about this feature, but you can click export. You can download a CSV for Excel, XML. There's a number of other formats here, an API endpoint to just bring this in directly into whatever your toolkit is that you're using. There are a number of languages supported, but just JSON and CSV format are pretty universal here. So if you're using Python or R or really anything that has that read CSV or read JSON, or JSON, depending on how you like to pronounce it, you'll be able to plug this link right in there. So the reason I'm stopping here and I'm not really going into like a more specific business case is because I'm actually going to go into the visualizer now and create a visualization. It's prompting me to sign in. If I don't have an account, that's okay. I can still use this tool, but I just won't be able to save my visualization. So that's an advantage of having an account, but we're not going to cover how to do that today. You can read up on some of the materials that are at the end of the presentation. So I am here. I am now presented with these 4 options to configure my visualization, and I'm presented with a number of different charts that I could use to visualize my data. And right off the bat, I'm just going to start adding some of the same data fields I did a moment ago. And what I'm doing is, notice I'm clicking on a little button that says add hierarchy. And I'm doing it in kind of a strange order here. I probably want this to be year and month to come second. But starting with my event type, and actually I want my event type to be understood in terms of each year. So I think this is enough to start with, and this is a count of rows. A count of rows here really isn't giving me much information as a measure, unlike it was in the major safety events file, because the counts here, apart from injuries, are going to be not one-to-one with the row. For example, total events will include both the OSANOC events. Well, it depends, I guess, on the event type. So if I have event type in my hierarchy, which I do, the OSANOC total events will usually be, so they will actually be totaled for the mode. So it is never one-to-one at this level. So a count of rows is not going to be very useful at this level because everything is aggregated by mode and month. So I never want to kind of misinterpret that. So I'm going to just start using total events. And I'm going to use a sum of total events. Well, you can see my totals are way high for 2008, 9, and 10. You can also see these years are not in order. This is a quirk of the system that I think we just have to work around, unfortunately, or at least I don't know of a way around it. Eager to hear feedback for anyone who does, to kind of make this a default sort, or maybe it's a function of our data type. I'm not sure. But if I go into chart sorting and I ascend by the label, it will fix that for me. It will start with the oldest year in the data set, which is 2008. So I have a whole lot of events reported in 2008, 271,000. And since I have event type in my hierarchy, I'm going to be able to drill in. There's a couple different ways I could do this. I could just go into event type and see, but if I actually click on 2008, that's going to give me the events in 2008. Well, first it's going to give me the months and then events. So fare evasion, that seems to be what's driving this. There were 18,000 just in the 1 month I clicked on. Where I have an advantage here over what we looked at in the kind of data transformer, like tabular visualizer, is I can add a filter even if the field isn't in my my dimensions here. So, think of that as like my grouping. So I'm able to add the event type here that is in my grouping, but I can say is not fare evasion, and then I can apply that. So a number of these other fields or event types or attributes of event type were also not present in years after 2010. I probably want to, really, if I'm doing a good job with this, go and remove all of those if I'm interested in kind of visualizing trends over time, and I want to apply the same adjustment that the threshold adjusted time series does in this non-major events file. But maybe I'm not interested in that. Maybe I'm just looking at 2008 through 2010 and events that occurred then. Well, I could leave those in. I'm not going to bore everyone with that. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to now drill back up. Apologies, not sure what happened there with year, but I'm going to start now just by selecting years greater than 2010. All right. Unfortunately, I do have to reapply the sorting here. Something to look out for. But now I can see I have 2011 through 2013, and this is a more stable looking trend, at least. if I wanted to visualize this a different way, I could look at it as a timeline. And you can see 2023, we're only, as of the reporting out here, we're only 4 months in. So we would take that with a grain of salt, and maybe I even want to improve my filter to do between 2010 and 2022. I can do that pretty easily like that. And, let's say I want to add another data point. So I'm going to add a measure, and I'm going to add worker injuries. So this is a little hard to read. Maybe I want this to be scaled on its own. One way I could do that is with a combo chart. So the combo chart is going to allow me to put these measures in different chart formats, and therefore on different axes. So I have total events in my column format, and I'm going to add total worker injuries in my line format. So this is nice because I can ask, well, do they follow the same trend? I probably need to look a little bit closer to really understand that, but I can see there's two axes now. The one on the right is my line, and I can toggle that here in the axis. I can choose which one is left and right if I want to do that. And you can see I can also do things like labeling here. So I can label my my chart non-major events and worker injuries. Add the legend in line. So that's kind of nice to see. I can add labels this way. This is through the presentation.
All right, I'm pausing again right here. Hopefully you've gotten a pretty good hang of how the DOT Open Data Catalog works. We'll go ahead and get to questions in just a minute here. As for the monthly modal time series, this is a valuable data product, especially if you're interested in aggregate data on the monthly level. And it's also great for showcasing our new assault on transit worker data.
All right, our final demonstration here.
Keep going. There are other files containing safety data that may apply to some of you, including annual counts of events reported by smaller systems, count of transit security personnel, and security events for special Federal Rail Administration regulated modes. I mentioned that transit worker assault data. That is part of our continual self-assessment. We're always welcome to feedback, again, at ntdhelp@dot.gov. Other recent improvements include the inclusion of the UACE code, which assists in historical analysis, consistency over census years, as well as monthly service data rates. Upcoming improvements include consolidated mode categorization, improved null handling, and improved redaction in that major events file. There are a lot of resources out there for you to use. Note that the data product frequently asked questions page link was missing from your handouts, but we've included it here. And if you have a question that you think would be a good candidate for the page, please let us know at that ntdhelp@dot.gov email address. The Open Data Portal user guide also covers the type of changes that we're making to the file on an ongoing basis.